Correct. And think about it. It's go and make disciples. So, it's pretty clear. I think we've made complicated something that's actually very simple.
How are you helping young people that come in that are anxious, that have no sense of community and have no sense that they make any difference, that their life is meaningful at all? How are you addressing that fundamental set of questions?
Yeah, it's tough. There's no question our institutions have seen an increase in mental health issues. Counseling centers, are hiring counselors to help students work through it. And I believe a lot of it is legitimate issues. And I think it's a reflection of the culture and society in which we are, especially post-COVID.
The U Association guys, your job is to get this mafia-esque like power, right? And control and build your budgets and build your staffs and get bigger, right? Can you talk to Philip for a minute and help him get his head around how he ought to behave instead of this thing about focusing on disciples?
So if you were to ask, what's our mission statement? We're about advancing biblical higher education for kingdom impact. The thing that they all hold in common is that they believe in the authority of the Word of God, and they're passionate about the Great Commission, going and making disciples.
But I really wanted to jump in and ask you 2 or 3 different questions before Dennis gets us off in some place that's not very interesting.
Good.
Hello, everyone. Dennis Allen and Raymond Monroe with the Disciple Dilemma. If you've been keeping up with us at all, you know that we're always having conversations, hunting for how we can reform discipleship in the Western Church. I would have never thought about looking for it in the accreditation boards of colleges and seminaries, but here we are having a conversation with the president of the Association for Biblical Higher Education, Dr. Philip Dearborn, and he is enthused about being at his core, at his mission, making disciples of these students. This is a cool conversation. Ride along with us. Here we go. Okay, well, here we go. Dr. Philip Dearborn, who is the president of the Association for Biblical Higher Education, along with a vitae that is absolutely fabulous. Thank you for being with us on the Disciple Dilemma.
It's a pleasure to be with you and love the work that you're doing, love the book that you wrote. So looking forward to this conversation.
Well, thank you. And I'm just grateful to get to hang just because of the exciting mission that we're about to look into. And before I do that, I just want to say thanks again to Raymond, who always cleans up my messes and helps the guests not feel too bad about things. Thanks, Raymond.
You're quite welcome, Dennis. Always a pleasure to be with you.
Philip, I am so excited about the work you guys are doing at the Association for Biblical Higher Education. And I want to probe all this as we roll along, but I thought what we might start out with is just a couple of minutes for you to tell us, what the heck are you at ABHE? Why are you, and what are you trying to get done there?
Yeah, absolutely. So Association for Biblical Higher Education, ABHE, we have been around for 77 years. This is our 77th year. And I would say over those 77 years, probably the main focus has been in the area of accreditation. So, in the United States, there's a peer evaluation system for colleges and universities. Those who are listeners maybe attended a undergrad work or seminary or graduate work. Most likely those institutions were accredited by either what were formerly known as regional accreditors, but there are also specialized accreditors along the way. So our niche, there are over 3,000, almost 4,000 colleges and universities all across the United States. But our niche is within specifically biblical higher education, so Bible colleges. And the Bible colleges started well over 125 years ago in the context of the church. I always give this interesting illustration. If you look up Harvard University's mission statement from 1636, a listener, go ahead and Google it right now. You will see a mission statement that looks like a Bible college. So Harvard University was preparing, at the time, men exclusively to be ministers of the good news of Jesus Christ and preparing leaders for the church. And churches realized that that was no longer happening. So Bible institutes started in the context, usually in the back of church auditoriums or in church basements, and thus biblical higher education started. So we've been on the scene as an association for 77 years. We have 157 members all throughout North America. That includes 19 in Canada. We have 2 in Puerto Rico, 2 in Alaska, 1 in Hawaii, and the remaining institutions are in the continental United States. Incredible scope of institution. Our largest institution would be Southeastern University in Lakeland, Florida, about 10,000 students. All the way to our smallest is St. Photius Theological Seminary in Northern California, maybe 15 students. But the thing that they all hold in common is that they believe in the authority of the Word of God, and they're passionate about the Great Commission, going and making disciples. So if you were to ask, what's our mission statement? We're about advancing biblical higher education for kingdom impact. So our role is to come alongside institutions. One of the services that we provide is accreditation, and that's its own unique, recognized by the U.S. Department of Education and all of those red tape elements. But really our focus is to come alongside institutions and help them flourish. We say if survival is your goal, you're done. Throw in the towel. In fact, I believe biblically, we're not called to survive. We're called to flourish. And so we need to claim that. So we're all about professional development, C-suite development, board governance training, training for presidents and chief academic officers and enrollment officers, the whole scope of what you would think in higher education. And ultimately, it's about kingdom impact. And how do you impact the kingdom? It's very clear from the Gospels. That it's going and making disciples. So that's our commitment. So any institution that identifies with that, we want them part of ABHE.
Hey, Raymond, you're an association guy, right? I mean, we gotta straighten this guy Philip out. You association guys, your job is to get this mafia-esque like power, right, and control, and build your budgets and build your staffs and get bigger, right? Can you talk to Philip for a minute and help him get his head around how he ought to behave instead of this thing about focusing on disciples?
I'd be delighted to share with you and Philip what we do at Steel Founders Society. We have really 2 core missions, Philip. One is we help people solve problems, and our main methodology is we make friends. That's what we do. Mm-hmm. That's our whole scope of planning and value system, is to help people solve problems by making friends. And so really it's the same thing you're doing. The Great Commission is both making disciples, and that means both having the scope of understanding to be able to help people, and having that network of contacts so that you can really do something. But I really wanted to jump in and ask you 2 or 3 different questions before Dennis gets us off in some place that's not very interesting. Philip, higher education. I assume you mean post-high school education.
You got it.
But does that include graduate studies, and is accreditation something that you need in graduate studies?
It's a great question. So higher education would be anything post K to 12. So you have your religious, you have your non-religious, you have seminaries, you have Bible colleges, it's incredible how diverse higher education is in North America. And I actually think it's fantastic. Because ultimately they're training leaders for the, whatever is coming next within every sector of society, whether that's the church or in business or wherever. So yes, it's broad, anything beyond K to 12 education, including seminary education.
So you're in education, and your accreditation is making sure you're delivering a product. The product of most education is to fill my head with stuff, but your mission is to change my heart. So how do you accredit changing my heart instead of just filling my head?
Yeah. So you've put your finger on exactly at the crossroads of where I think higher education is in America. I think the public is asking that question. They're asking the value question. What am I going to get out of this experience? And unfortunately, I think the cost of higher education has driven us to that point. I think also the public's expectation when they show up on campus of what they're going to get in a college experience drives some of that. But ultimately, it really is, it's a value proposition. And I think education right now, higher education, I think it's also K to 12 education. We're asking those hard questions of even what is education? Bring on artificial intelligence. Well, if AI can generate my paper, why do I even need to go to college? So there's something fundamentally of value there. And I think historically, and I think this is important, it's the ultimate goal is changed hearts, right? But in order to do that, you have to have the skills to think critically. And we're in a consumer environment. We want this and we want this and instantaneous. We want it right away. I don't want to think about it. I don't want to care about it. I don't care where it came from. I just want it. And education is saying, well, hold on a second. There's a whole philosophy. There's a whole ideology that's driving that. You have to have the capacity to think critically, to be able to say what's good information, what's bad information, so that it drives towards a decision. Specifically within biblical higher education, we believe in the authority of the Word of God. The Word of God has something to say about everything that we experience in life. So that is the measure, that's the guide to help us process and understand the world around us. And so, yes, we love the fact that you love Jesus, but there's so much more to it. And that's like a beginning piece. And so we're committed to training that next generation to understand the world around them, that they can engage culture, that they can engage the world, and ultimately fulfill what we believe is the second side of a two-sided coin. The first side is the creation mandate captured in Genesis. The other side of that coin is the Great Commission. Go and make disciples. And that's what our institutions are committed to. And it happens formally, and I think it happens non-formally, and it happens through relationship. And I think that's the value add to our sector. We're not just giving products and degrees and knowledge, because I think you can get knowledge pretty much anywhere now. It's what do you do with it? And how do you make sure that you know how to approach it within the context of the church so that you can effectively lead people forward? And I think there's a higher standard to those of us who lead. Well, not think, I know from Scripture, those of us who lead are held to a higher standard from God's economy. So I think all the more that we should do it and do it well.
Folks, you're seeing the website for the Association for Biblical Higher Education on the screen as we're talking, in the link to get there. But I want to encourage you, take a look at the video on the website, the opening video. It's a Vimeo look at what ABH is. It will blow your brains out when you think about this is not behaving like I think a higher educational institution seeking its own survival, its own better interests behaves. These guys seem to be pointed toward a completely different ethos. And so, Philip, I wanted you to give us a little bit of a tutorial. I'm going to ask you about the challenges facing biblical higher education institutions right now. Yeah. And folks, just so you know, Philip's been in the saddle here. He's been a provost at Lancaster Bible College, right? So he's had the experience riding in the saddle, and now he's leading the larger body of groups of schools here. So strategically, Philip, what is it that you see, not in a secular world, but in the biblical higher education world, that's staring you guys down on the strengths, weaknesses, opportunity, threat matrix?
Yeah. Tremendous challenge. The thing about me is I'm the eternal optimist. So challenges.
That's a good thing.
Challenges are simply opportunities. So we face some challenges, but and the other thing is it's who we serve ultimately, and that's our Heavenly Father and the church. And when I read the Scriptures, there's plan A, there is no plan B. So I don't know of any other industry that's guaranteed survival. The church is guaranteed survival. The church is always going to need leaders. Leaders are always going to be trained. So that's why I have an overconfidence in the fact of not just only surviving, but thriving, because ultimately that's what God is calling us to do. One of the huge challenges that I don't know if the general population knows this, but we call it the enrollment cliff. We collect data the United States collects a lot of data. One of the things that we know and can predict are the number of eligible students to go to college. And in the year 2026, that cliff drops off significantly. The number of people, and this is across every region of the United States, people are having less kids. And it's kind of like the pig in the python. So there's a residual impact with this, right? So people are having fewer kids. We've known this ever since they entered kindergarten and went to first grade, the second grade, all the way up now to 12th grade. In 2026, those numbers are out. So the pool shrinks significantly. That's going to be a major challenge across all of higher education, as well as biblical higher education. And I think it ultimately is going to impact the church then too, because there are fewer people. The pool isn't as big of the numbers of people who feel God's call to serve and to serve within the context of the church. That number is going to shrink significantly. So that's huge. And that we're in this post-COVID world now too, where the at least initial responses are people aren't getting married and they're not having children, or at least they're delaying having children. So this is a problem that's going to be with us for quite some time. What's its impact? I think there are too many colleges and universities. And you're actually starting to see a number of colleges and universities closing for a myriad of reasons, usually financial. They just simply cannot keep pace with their overhead costs. There's a little number that institutions track. It's called discount rate. How colleges offer scholarships, right? So discount rates, it would be interesting for you to even guess like how much off the sticker price if a college says it costs $30,000 a year to go here. That would be their sticker price. Well, colleges on average are discounting their costs by a factor of 65%. And that number has continually increased year after year after year. And really it's a race to the bottom. And inevitably what happens, parents with junior go to college A and say, hey, what's my financial aid package? Oh, fantastic. They go to college B and they say, hey, college A gave us this scholarship package. What can you do? And college B says, all right, we'll match it and we'll give you another $1,000. Then they go back to college A and say, hey, look what college B did for us. So it becomes this race to the bottom, and you're going to lose every time. In fact, the Chronicle of Higher Education a couple of years ago wrote an article that we're going to have a lot of colleges close with full classrooms because they're coming in, but they can't keep pace.
This is the classic problem of deflation, just like in China, right? You've got too much supply chasing too little demand.
Yep.
And that's in a sense what's really going on here, right?
And it's going to break. It's not sustainable. And this isn't just Philip Dearborn's opinion. This is broadly understood within the market of higher education. So it's definitely. So I'd say those are a couple trends. We're post COVID. We're in this wet cement stage. We don't know what adjusted with COVID with online education, how things are going to shift and change. Another challenge is artificial intelligence. How's that going to impact things? I think it's going to bring on what is known as competency-based education, which, you follow the adaptation curve. A competency-based education came on the scene a couple of years ago. It kind of dipped a little bit. Now it's coming back again. And basically it addresses the value question. It addresses the efficiency question and says, I don't want to start at leadership 101. I have experiences in life that I can bring to the educational process. I just want to be educated in the areas that I need it. And that's competency-based education. So those are some of the challenges that we're facing. But ultimately, to me, I'm a huge means and ends guy. The end is clear. It's not going to change. It is fulfilling the Great Commission. How we do that, we need to hold that loosely. And that's exactly what's happening within our sector.
So I want to make a statement here because I'm about to ask Philip a question that could be interpreted as both harsh, and his response might even be interpreted as harsh. But I'd like to say this. We brought this up before. We're about to have a conversation where I don't want anyone interpreting the conversation of provocative questions as criticism or condemnation of the church, pastors, believers, the professors, the faculty, the staff of these higher educational institutions that Philip represents either. But I'm going to ask this question now.
Yep.
because I'm a capitalist, I'm on the dark side, right? I'm coming at it kind of like from the idea of being a turnaround CEO. Mm-hmm. One of the most common problems I run into at the sub level, this is not the primary problem, but it's a sub level, is the business has slowly received less and less quality of material. The raw material coming in just keeps going downhill. And we keep trying to make the stuff turn out as a quality product, even though the quality of the incoming raw material is very poor. Philip, just let's be honest. Nobody's listening. Let's just talk about this for a second, right? You guys are getting some pretty thin gruel in the raw material of students coming in today versus a decade ago or 20 years ago, right? I mean, just lay it out for us. What's going on out there with the students you're receiving? Are they just as good, or has there been a difference over the last 20 years?
Yeah, it's you know, the podcast isn't long enough to give the full academic answer to that question. So it's a great provocative question, and I'll give a provocative answer. How about that? It works both ways. I think one of the elements that is a challenge for higher education is that we create our own reality, right? So we're part of the system and we create mirrors of what was. So yeah, even the idea of, well, if I learned it this way, then I'm going to teach it this way. And so it's this perpetual, it's single loop learning, right? If you're into organizational theory, it's single loop learning. We've got to break that and move towards what is referenced in the literature to double loop learning, where we actually challenge some of those norms. And I think our schools are doing that. Perhaps their motivation is flourishing or survival, but I think they are motivated to make a difference. They are looking at it and saying, whoa, we can't just keep repeating what we've done in the past. That has been education. Seth Godin, who writes on this stuff, I'm not sure if you're familiar with his name. He has a great TED talk that he does on education is a result of the modernist era of manufacturing. Education is line them up in rows, seat 1, seat 2, seat 3, seat 4. We're creating parts of a machine. And if one machine gets out of it, then we just put another one in its place. And there's elements to education that have stuck that way all the way through and is part of higher education. We've got to break that mold. And I think what we're seeing with your observation of students coming in who aren't as prepared, the way I describe it is the starting line is not the same. It keeps moving back, but the expectation is still the same, that we cross at the other end of the spectrum, right? Well, that just it becomes harder and harder to do over a period of time. So I think what ultimately happens over time is it becomes watered down. There's no way we can make up that much space. So it's this perpetual problem that we're producing graduates. Those graduates are going and serving in the context of the church. They're training people in the context of the church who are then the students who come into the institution, right? So it's this cycle that somehow we've got to address and somehow we've got to break. I love our institutions. I think they're doing a phenomenal job of breaking that cycle and asking the hard questions and saying, wait a second, we're kind of living with what we've produced. We've got to do things differently. Double loop learning. We got to challenge the norms. We got to think differently about how we're preparing the next generation of leaders for the church. So that's yes, I agree with you, but what are we going to do about it? And I think some of our institutions are starting to figure that out.
Let me ask a couple of questions there for you. A couple of things that I've talked with my kids about. I have my oldest son is a professor, but he's at a small university that's not very good. University.
I have to object. I have to object to the way the question's being framed. What were you going to say, Raymond? I'm sorry.
In any case, we've talked about the whole challenge, and of course, he's looking at it. And his big challenge in engineering is to get students to think critically, because unlike my generation, where you were supposed to add value to every community you joined to earn your place, The students come in and they've had the same experience their whole life. They walk
Yeah.
up to a table and adults behind it. There's crap on the table. The adult says, put it together. If they stand there long enough, the adult will put it together and give them a B and move them on.
Yeah.
So there's no critical thinking
Mm-hmm.
requirement and all of
Yep.
that.
Yep.
And then even in Scouts, we have the experience that they don't believe that learning is for life skills or life development. It's a game. And once I pass this stage, I don't have to remember any of that
Yeah.
crap.
Yeah.
So even when you're doing basic mathematics, you have to remind them of the algebra before you can teach them calculus because they don't
Yeah.
remember it.
Yep.
How do you deal with this changing culture
Yeah.
where, and especially my real core question is, you talked a lot about critical thinking. I think it's difficult to find professors who do critical thinking. So learning
Yeah.
how to teach critical thinking, I think, is really challenging.
I agree with you 100%. And that is the challenge of higher education. I think it's also an effect of the trickle down effect, because a lot of what you've mentioned, I think, are general labels that are accurate for higher education. But I think you do have to look at subsectors within
Sure.
that and say, okay, maybe there are some that are doing it differently, that are understanding it. I make the statement. In fact, we're addressing this head on. Two assumptions when faculty are hired. Two assumptions college presidents make is, one, they know how to teach, and two, that they know how to teach from a biblically integrated perspective. Those are two very dangerous assumptions to make. We're losing a generation. We've got to engage this culture. So we're addressing it head on. We're in the silent phase of raising almost $2 million to put together a whole biblical integration and teaching initiative for our 6,300 faculty members at all of our institutions that address those things straight out. We're going to develop 100 courses that will help them teach better and teach from a biblically integrated perspective on issues like discipleship and the importance of discipleship. The faculty members who are teaching at our institutions, I guarantee you they could be making more money somewhere else. But they have committed. They see the value of this. They see that the stakes are high. They see that souls hang in the balance. So it's not just this transaction that hey, I've got tenure, I'm making my money, I've got my long-term contract, nobody can touch me, nobody can fire me, I'm set. I can just pull off the same course material that I did 10 years ago. Not at our institutions. They're saying, look, God has called me to this. I'm fulfilling my call in the context of the school. I'm all about discipleship. I wish you could hear some of the stories of life on life. I mean, these students coming from the backgrounds and contexts that they are, the relationships that they're building with these faculty members. Yes, they're getting the content and critical thinking skills in the classroom, but they're building relationships with these faculty members.
Philip, I am really interested in this conversation, because as we travel around and talk with churches as well as seminaries, as well as colleges, one of the things that I'm hearing over and over again is, I'm in the education business. I do academics. Or in the churches, we have programs, we have ministries. We're an institution as well, right? Churches, they don't like saying it this way. And again, this is not a criticism of churches. We've all been raised, marinated in this sauce. But the institutions tend to lean toward academics is all I need to deliver. Somebody else is in charge of the life on life. So you're actually, in your mission, making this statement. This is what we as a group of schools do. And you're telling me that it's starting to get some traction with your faculty.
We have not done a good job of telling our story. In fact, the videos that you reference on our website, that's starting to tell the story. We've got to get this word out that things are different on our campuses. God is at work. We understand this thing of discipleship. Discipleship is hard work. It's investing in people. People don't see it. People don't see it or hear about the faculty members who are getting phone calls at 10, 11, 12 o'clock at night, or the student who's crying in the faculty office because of X, Y, and Z. They're pouring into their lives. And I went to a major university for my master's and my doctorate. Didn't get that there. But I did get it in my undergrad studies by faculty members who cared and invested in my life.
That was the discipleship you're talking about that really just wasn't part of the full curriculum at your postgrad work.
Correct. And think about it. Again, it's go and make disciples. So, it's pretty clear. I think we've made complicated something that's actually very simple.
I think, though, the biggest challenge that I'm running into in the Western biblical conversation about discipleship is we have reduced discipleship to programs and large group gatherings, and we've gotten away from this piece that you're talking about the one-on-ones.
Yeah. So I draw a distinction between tensions and problems. That's not a problem. That's a tension. You can't organically say discipleship happen, right? There's a system, there's a structure, there's a process, and I think it's biblical, and you can make a very strong biblical argument about how Jesus led his disciples. He didn't just, by osmosis did it happen. He invested in their lives. He met them where they were at. He poured into their lives. And I think we've missed that. So I think you have to hold intention. You solve problems, you manage tensions. So you manage this tension of this spiritual thing that is discipleship that's kind of hard to get our hands around, and say, okay, well, how do we accomplish that? We've got to do it through systems, processes, programs, but not as an end in itself, as a means towards that end.
So when we've talked to ordinary ministry activities, in church, outside of church, and you say discipleship to many people, they immediately think we need a discipleship program that's a pyramid scheme where we're teaching apologetics and evangelism. You're talking about something fundamentally different. You're talking about making friends for life to walk alongside in terms of Christian living.
Yeah. It's interesting because in our church, we emphasize small groups, and that was discipleship. And Amy and I always kind of resisted that because we were embedded in our community. Our sons played soccer. We were together all the time. It was a travel team. Our small group was the parents on that soccer team. We were with them all the time. I did a funeral. I did a wedding. We were so close, and we often felt bad in the push at church to say, you got to be part of a small group. You got to be part of a small group. And we're like, wait a second, people who we're doing life with, that's our small group. That's discipleship.
How are you helping young people that come in that are anxious, that have no sense of community, and have no sense that they make any difference, that their life is meaningful at all? How are you addressing that fundamental set of questions?
Yeah, it's tough. There's no question our institutions have seen an increase in mental health issues. The counseling centers, are hiring counselors to help students work through it. And I believe a lot of it is legitimate issues. And I think it's a reflection of the culture and society in which we are, especially post-COVID, having to deal with something that no adult in their life had ever dealt with. It's going to create anxiety. It absolutely is going to create anxiety. So what do they do with that? How do they process it? And I think we're seeing the result of that. That's the product that's coming into our institutions. So I think you've very well articulated where that line is, and the raw material that our faculty start with our students, and how they've been programmed. It's almost like a deprogramming before they can then set them off into the right direction.
Philip, I want to explore a perspective that you have a unique view on, looking at all of these different schools and institutions, and that is that there are two substantial tensions in the society that we call America today, loosely categorized as the Great Awakening and the Make America Great Again activities, right? This is the idea of Christian nationalism, a very broad term, just as the woke definition is very broad, but both of them demand a tremendous amount of loyalty, fealty, people to look their way, lest you be canceled or excluded, lest you be left out. How are your schools sensing this, and what kind of things are they having to do to deal with it if they are sensing it? How's it going out there?
Yeah, it's a reality. Look, it's that's part of the raw product that's coming into the institution. So our faculty members, our staff members, they have to deal with those things, and it breaks my heart that we've come to this point in our culture and in our society that everything is an either or. It's really boiled down to a binary question, right? It's either yes or no, and your response to whatever the issue is. If it's yes, then this is my consequence of how I'm going to treat you. If it's no, then this is how I'm going to. And we know, and especially when it comes within the church context, no one lives their life that way. We're on this journey with the experiences. We're constantly being made into the image of Christ. We're constantly learning. We're constantly being refined. And who I was 20 years ago is not who I am today. My perspective 20 years ago is not what my perspective is today. We've not given the space for people to learn and to grow and to make mistakes and to use critical thinking skills to say, oh man, in my youth, that's how I thought. But now that I'm older and have experience and wisdom has taught me to say that this is how I thought, but this is where I am. We're all on this continuum, but for some reason we're stuck in this either or, and I'm going to treat you depending on how you answer. And I'm going to wear my labels as badges, right? And I'm now an expert because I'm all of these things, so I can speak to that. And we've lost something in just civil dialogue of being able to talk through some of these issues. Having said all that, I think we can also fall into the danger of the good old days. I'm not sure there were really good old days. There were issues in the good old days, right? There were issues 1,000 years ago. There were issues 2,000 years ago. Last time I read church history, Christians weren't treated real well. In fact, some of them died for their faith, right? In horrific ways. So I think we have to be careful too, to recognize that this has been part of what it means to be a Christ follower forever. And it's just contextualized within our environment and our culture. So that still begs the question, how do we then go and make disciples? The same calling is there. We just have to contextualize it to the culture in which we are. I try to avoid a lot of those conversations because it's the wrong conversation to have. But yet it's the culture in which we're immersed. So you have to engage it.
So Dennis will probably cut this out, but I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Okay? One of the most fundamental challenges I see is Paul faces these same kind of absolutely critical questions about circumcision, of do I keep the Jewish holy days? Do I eat things that are unclean? And he puts it into the category of Christian liberty. How do we do that? And are we trying to do that in education?
So we need to create those spaces for those conversations to happen and to actually practice it, where I can disagree with you, but I can still love you, without compromising orthodox. And sometimes these issues bump up against that, right? So that's where you have to develop the skills to be able to have those conversations, because that's when things get heated. I can respect somebody when they have a different opinion, but when they start bringing orthodox into it, okay, now I really got to think carefully about my theological framework in order to have the conversation. And I think it's happening in our institutions. I'm not sure it's happening in the traditional university. Where I think, and you hear stories about this and experiences where, Christian students go off to the major college or university, and they lose their faith, right? And as a Christian, they're not permitted, or they don't dare bring up a Christian thought or perspective in a class because of fear of what's going to happen to them. Boy, have we really gotten to that point that we can't have conversation around something. And that's what scholarship is. It's that iron sharpening iron, making us better by engaging the people around us in thoughts that then shape what our own thoughts are, and therefore the human experience.
Hey, well, Dr. Philip Dearborn, we're thinking that this ABHE animal is it's a few schools, right? Can you give us just a few numbers to get an idea of what we're talking about?
ABHE has 157 institutions all throughout North America, which includes 19 north of the border in Canada, 2 in Alaska, 2 in Puerto Rico, 1 in Hawaii, and the rest in the continental United States. And together they enroll about 67,000 students. And these are students who have sensed that God has called them to something. They may not necessarily know what it is, but they're experiencing God's call in their life. And it just is amazing to me that 68,000 students right now are at our institutions who are studying the Word of God and trying to figure out what is it that God has called them to. And so it's a tremendous movement of God with a very, very rich history that has really impacted the kingdom. And I say it in one of our videos, on this side of eternity, we will never know the full impact. But I look forward to the day in eternity where we can look back and see all of those connections that were made that really don't matter now. The work is in front of us, but someday we'll be able to celebrate and see how God worked through it. And I literally cannot wait for that day.
We are putting up on the screen right now, again, the Association for Biblical Higher Education's website. You can see where that's located on the internet. Go check that out. But Philip, give us a couple of thoughts about, I'm interested, I want to support, I want to be a part of, or I just want to learn more about this as I get ready to maybe even look at my kids where they're going to go to school. Yeah. What can ABHE do for me, and what can I do for ABHE?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I would say to your listener base, pray for biblical higher education. That's probably the number one thing that you can do. It's a difficult world out there. And our men and women on our campuses, the faculty members, are doing a phenomenal job. And I believe in the power of prayer. And even if you're just now listening to this, say a prayer for biblical higher education. I think that's the number one thing. And, we have a ton of resources on it. You can certainly give to ABHE. We'd love, there's links on our website for you to do that. But support biblical higher education by learning, finding out about our institutions and seeing what God is doing on our campuses and encouraging students to enroll. Hey, I know that you want to go to major university X, but have you considered Moody Bible Institute in Chicago? Have you considered Dallas Baptist University in Dallas, Texas? Have you considered Cairn University in Philadelphia? These schools are just doing amazing things, and they're not on everybody's radar. So point people in our direction. We're doing the best that we can to tell our story, and we're going to continue to do it because it's such a good story to tell of lives that are being changed because of their engagement with their education on our campuses and catching the fire of going and making disciples.
Philip, we are so grateful today. You came with us. Thank you for being a part of the Disciple Dilemma.
Absolutely. And I appreciate the questions. I mean, this is the kind of conversation that we need to have. So this was an absolute delight for me to be a part of. And so thank you.
Would you help the church think more about discipleship? Would you help us get the conversation started to talk about the biblical discipleship Jesus gave us? Please follow us. Our website, www.thediscipledilemma.com. You can find us on YouTube, LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, and all the RSS feeds. If you'd follow or like us, you'll help us get leverage in the digital marketplace to talk about the fact that discipleship needs to be talked about. And as always, folks, thanks for listening.